Hello, my name is Ted Burns, and I'm Senior Director of Political Affairs for the American College of Radiology. And I'm going to give you a presentation on what's happening, the latest, both politically and legislatively, here in Washington, D.C. This presidential election summary slide has been very difficult to do, obviously, because it's changed so often, even just over the last hour, let alone 24 hours, let alone 48 hours, let alone 72 hours. Obviously, very tight race. It looks like Biden will be the 46th president of the United States. He pretty much has to get just one state to put him into the 270 plus category, which is needed to become president. And if Trump were to somehow come back and sweep every state, he could potentially do it. But at this point, it doesn't look likely. Obviously, by all the news reports, President Trump is going to file and has filed many lawsuits, and we'll have to see how many of those play out and how that will impact the ultimate decision. But at this point, it looks like Vice President Biden will now be President Biden. Probably more impactful directly to radiology are the congressional elections and the results of the House and Senate races. In the House, you had all 435 House races up. Going into the election, the Democrats had a majority by 35 seats. Republicans got a net gain of 6, which was somewhat surprising. Many felt that the House would expand their majority, but that, in fact, did not happen. There are still 34 races that have not been called. No major or significant amount of those are considered to be ones that would flip to the point where Republicans could actually get back the majority. The next question, and really the big question, will be, will Speaker Pelosi continue to be Speaker in the new Congress, which would be the 117th Congress starting in January? She's very savvy and she's very good at what she's done for her Democrat caucus in the eyes of the Democrats for the most part. But obviously, it's a pretty fractured party, and there's been a lot of interest in Congresspeople such as Karen Bass from California, as well as Hakeem Jeffries from New York, to maybe take over from Speaker Pelosi just to get new blood, new ideas, new energy in that role for the Democrats in the House. So we'll have to see how that plays out. In the Senate, there were 35 races that were up this election cycle. Every 2 years is the third, a third, a third. So this year we have 35 races. Going into the elections, Republicans had a 3-seat majority. Democrats so far have gained just the one. There was talk probably within the last week or two that Democrats could win as many as 4 or 5 flips and therefore get the majority, but that does not look as likely now. There are still 3 states that have not been called: Alaska, Georgia, North Carolina. All have Republican incumbent senators who are up and all appear to be in the lead and relatively likely to win. We do know that there will be at least one runoff of one of the Georgia senators, and that Georgia senator is a Republican. We'll have to see how that plays out. That runoff, I believe, is in January. So what's going to happen now that the election is kind of over? We have to look at what's called the lame duck session, and that will be probably a window of time that starts sometime in the next week or so and will go into mid to late December. I don't think the outcome of the election, for the most part, even though obviously there's likely to be a change in the White House, I don't think there would be a major impact legislatively on what would have happened if things were status quo, just because you still have Republicans likely to be in control in the Senate and Democrats still likely in control of the House. And so as a result of status quo, December 11th is the real date to watch. That is the deadline for the continuing resolution budget that needs to be passed. And within that continuing budget resolution, will that serve as a larger legislative vehicle for other things, perhaps our legislation that we'll get into in a little bit regarding the E&M cuts or surprise medical billing? The other thing is, will there be a legislative vehicle involving a stimulus for COVID-19? And that will require, obviously, some sort of involvement or negotiation with Trump, because he will still be president until the end of the year, and what level of activity he will want to engage with Democrats on that issue. Speaking of issues, we have a whole list of issues that we are constantly monitoring. This list is not exhaustive. There certainly are many other issues in addition to this list that we are following and monitoring very closely, but these are kind of the top tier issues as far as being what we would call ripe for legislative consideration or legislative action. And so these are the ones that we're most focused on at this moment. Looking at our efforts on the EM issue, obviously the EM cuts that are looming, likely to go into effect 1/1/21, or at least proposed to go into effect 1/1/21. We've been working at this for an awfully long time, and going back to the spring, the college's government relations office, in coordination with RAPAC, developed a coalition of what we call loser provider groups. By that, we mean those who are on the negative side of the EM proposed cuts. And there is well over 50 provider groups. Some of them are MDs, some of them are non-MD provider groups and organizations, but it's a very strong, very visible bunch of groups and organizations that make up that coalition that gives a lot of strength to the issue that this is not just radiology getting screwed on one particular issue, but that there are a lot of groups who are set to get hit negatively by these EM cuts. RAPAC specifically since September has raised over $100,000 from members of Congress. We have been doing daily Zoom calls with different members of Congress, particularly those on the committees of jurisdiction on EM issue, whether Senate Finance Committee or even the Senate Health Committee, Health, Education, Labor, Pensions, or whether that's the House Energy and Commerce or House Ways and Means Committees, or even the House Appropriations Committee. One thing that we've been doing, which has been very cool, and it's kind of one of the few blessings in disguise, if there is such a thing with COVID and how things have changed, is us being able to incorporate local radiologists on Zoom fundraising calls. It used to be that if we had a fundraising event for a member of Congress, really is our best way to have access to a member of Congress and talk about our issues. That would be held in Washington, D.C., and it really obviously would not be easy to get a member of the college or a radiologist to come from their state, leave their practice and family to come in just for a fundraising event for an hour for a breakfast or a lunch or a dinner event, and then go home. So now that all the fundraising events are by Zoom calls, because we're not doing in-person events anymore on the Hill, that has allowed us to really incorporate our local radiologists more into these conversations with members of Congress. And that's been really effective and impactful, because no matter how good of a lobbyist that we all think we are here in the government relations office, we're not in the district. We're not voters in the district. We're also not doctors, and having the clinical perspective and anecdotal information that a local radiologist for that member of Congress can add to a fundraising event and a call is really pretty good. And so that's something I encourage all of our radiologists to start considering to do. And we're making a list of those who are interested in getting involved, and we're trying to incorporate them as much as we can. We've also been doing calls to action to our membership of the American College of Radiology, asking them to contact their House members to sign on to various congressional letters, to submit comments to CMS, and we've had pretty good response overall. Obviously, all those things help if you're looking at the big puzzle and all the different pieces that go into advocacy and having visibility on your issue, and that's something that's been very important. So this is a list of some of the results leading up to bills that we just recently got introduced to stop the E&M cuts. We had over 90 House members sign onto a letter from Congressman Bobby Rush from the Energy and Commerce Committee asking to waive budget neutrality, which is kind of required really for the most part as a legislative fix on the E&M cuts as you increase payment for one type of provider group or group of providers, then you have to decrease it for others in order for the budget neutrality provision to be intact. And the only way to change that is to waive the budget neutrality. That's something that has a mixed level of support on the Hill, quite honestly. Many on the Hill don't want to tinker with or change that budget neutrality provision, thinking that once you change it once, it's going to be hard to get it back. And so that's one approach. It's probably the strongest approach, but it's not always the easiest approach to get support from on the Hill. We had what I call a softer letter that came after the Bobby Rush letter, and this letter was from Ami Bera and Larry Bucshon, Democrat and Republican respectively, both physician members of Congress. They got over 200 bipartisan signatures. Now, they did not specifically ask for the waiving of budget neutrality. They just basically said, hey, the E&M cuts is a problem. We need to fix it, and we want leadership to take a major role in trying to fix it between now and the end of the year before it goes into effect. So a pretty easy ask without having very specific recommendations in that letter. But anytime you can get 200 bipartisan signatures in this political environment, particularly this was about 6 weeks ago, is really remarkable and very impactful for House leadership on both sides, Democrat and Republican, to see. We also had a bipartisan House letter led by physician member Congressman Roger Marshall from Kansas, who just won his race to become a senator in Kansas, and Bobby Rush, and that was considering changing the E&M rule, being directed to CMS specifically. We know that CMS has been adamant that they are not going to change the rule or not likely to change the rule, that this legislative fix is really required because of the budget neutrality provision. But nonetheless, we felt that a letter from the House would have some impact with CMS, just kind of putting it on the radar that a lot of members of Congress are following this issue, and that there's a little bit of pressure that maybe that this applies to CMS as they do future rulemaking. And then we also had letters written individually by Senator Susan Collins, and that one specifically asked to waive budget neutrality, and that was sent to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, as well as a letter sent by Senator Steve Daines of the Senate Finance Committee to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and that one just asked to stop the cuts that did not mention budget neutrality. But again, trying to get an echo chamber from both the House and the Senate, going to the leadership of the House and Senate to really put this on everyone's radar. These letters also are not easy to get commitment from members of Congress. So to get one, let alone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters listed here is pretty significant effort that it took from not just the College of Radiology, but to coordinate that with all the other coalition groups. And it was pretty impressive effort. The effort from those letters really produced 2 different bills that we have been able to get recently introduced in the House. One is from Congressman Michael Burgess from Texas, who is a physician member of Congress, and his has just 7 co-sponsors at this moment. The bill was just introduced in the last probably 3 weeks. And basically, this bill would waive budget neutrality for 1 year, and they would tap into what's called the Provider Relief Funds, which is a pool of money used as part of kind of the COVID emergency relief. And the college certainly appreciates Congressman Burgess for introducing this legislation, particularly waiving the budget neutrality for a year. However, obviously a year fix, while better than the cuts going into effect, is just only a year fix. And so we're looking for a solution that's going to be a little bit longer lasting and something that can have a little bit more permanence. Just within the last week, right before the election, Congressman Ami Bera and Larry Bucshon Those two I mentioned earlier, who had led a letter that had the 200 bipartisan co-sponsors or co-signers in the House, they introduced legislation which is a different approach than Congressman Michael Burgess's bill. The Bera-Buchan bill already has 10 bipartisan co-sponsors, and again, it just was introduced, and we'll have a significant amount by the next couple of weeks when we do our grassroots on this. But it does not address budget neutrality provision. What it does is hold harmless provision, and the hold harmless says that basically for the next 2 years, those who are going to be provider groups on the plus side of the E&M policy would still get their plus, but those on the negative side, such as radiology, would actually have reimbursement be the same as the 2020 year levels. And so we would be basically saved of a cut for 2 years. Now, that is also not the permanent solution we're looking for. However, 2 years is certainly better than the 1 year bill of Burgess, and it allows us some time to get some impact data, a little bit more impact data of what those E&M cuts, if they had gone into effect, would really do, and look for a longer term solution to this problem. Now, the difference also between the Burgess bill and the Bera-Buchan bill is that there's really very little to any opposition to the Burgess bill. However, on the Bera-Buchan bill, the family docs and the College of Physicians are a bit opposed to the bill in the sense that they feel that by keeping our reimbursement level the same, it also keeps their reimbursement level the same in those areas that are not E&M billed, and therefore they don't feel like they're getting a full cut, or excuse me, a full bonus, which they are for the E&M part, but they're not getting the full bonus outside of that, and they're upset by that. So basically, they're getting a little greedy, and I think if you had a drink with them in a bar, they would admit that they're getting a little greedy, but they're representing their membership. We certainly understand that, but they're opposed to this bill. But really, there's only about 5 groups opposed to this bill, the Bera-Buchan bill, whereas the level of support with the different coalition that we have, as well as other groups, we far outweigh and support their opposition. So looking at surprise billing, that's another issue that had been really hot for about a year or so, about a year ago, and now it's resurfaced. This is something that President Trump had mentioned quite a bit on the campaign trail. It's been a priority for a few members of Congress, in particular on the Senate side. There's a big difference with how to fix this issue. One approach is to kind of side a little bit more on the insurers. The other approach, which is more on the Ways and Means side, is to be a little bit more provider friendly, create an arbitration process, independent dispute resolution type process. Obviously, everyone agrees keeping the patients out of the equation, but how they're going to reconcile the differences in the billing is really where this issue has hit some snags. Senator Cassidy, who is a physician member of Congress and just got reelected from Louisiana, he's been working with Senator Lamar Alexander, who's chairman of the Health Committee. Senator Alexander is a little bit more on the insurer side of the issue. Cassidy, being a physician member of Congress, is a little bit more on the physician side of the issue. Apparently, they have gotten an agreement between the two of them on a solution that should satisfy both sides between the insurers and the providers. However, we have not seen the details of that negotiation. Obviously, it's been a pretty tough year for RadPac. Looking at the giving levels at this time last year versus this year, we're about 200,000 behind pace, as well as more than 350 contributors less than last year's pace. And so we had stopped our fundraising, our active fundraising, back in mid-March when COVID was considered a pandemic. And we did not restart our fundraising for RadPac until the last day of July. So that time off and not having the ACR annual meeting and the RadPac Gala and these things that we've done for years to raise money, not having those has really put us behind the 8 ball here with our fundraising. Similarly, California specifically has been down. If you look at levels for the entire year of 2019 or the entire year of 2018 compared to where things are now in California for this year, it's pretty far below. If you're looking at 46 total contributors with only about a month and a half left of the year, compared to well over 200 contributors in each of the last two previous years, we're pretty far behind. You're looking at also being down about a 6-to-1 ratio of contribution dollars. Usually we have about 7, 8 outstanding practice groups giving to RADPAC. This year we have only had 3. Obviously, SDI is one of those. We're very appreciative. Thank you very much for the continued support from your practice. It's been a huge help for us. If you want to look at how competitive this environment is, it very much is so. If you look at the 2019 final numbers of fundraising, the anesthesiologists are the gold standard, raising almost 2.8 million last year. We were ranked 4th, raising just over $1 million. Again, based off the last couple of slides, it's going to be hard for us to even get to $1 million this year. If we do not get to $1 million this year in 2020, it'll be the first time in I think 10 years we've not had at least $1 million raised. And this is really the political impact. In addition to us getting access to members of Congress to participate in fundraising events that we host or that we just support, we also use our resources for what's called independent expenditures. We use it whether it's direct mail, whether it's digital, which we did with Senator Daines in the bottom left. That's a clip that I took off of a website that we advertised on. In the bottom right is a mail piece that we did for Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, who ran for Senate in New Mexico, who's considered to be a rising star. Steve Daines, you may remember from earlier in the presentation, he was one of the senators who wrote a letter on behalf of stopping the E&M cuts. And then Richie Neal at the very top with this news clip. Richie Neal, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, he really was the one that made sure surprise medical billing on the insurer side of the bill did not get through the House. He was very adamant that anything with surprise billing include a more provider-friendly solution. And so we had to be supportive of his efforts, and we helped his race with a couple mail pieces during his late primary, which he is very appreciative of. And this is why it's also important. We're dealing with 435 members in the House. We're dealing with 100 senators. And if you look at the 535 members of Congress, only 30 in this current Congress have a healthcare background. That means 94% of Congress has no healthcare background. So that is a lot of educating that we have to do, getting them up to speed on all the different issues and how their policy decisions really directly impact not just you as providers, but also the patients that you take care of. And if you want to look also politically at why this is important, there were 36 physicians running for Congress, whether the House or the Senate, in this past election. Only 14 of those 36 won. Now, there's still 6 races out of that 36 total that have not been determined yet, but that is not a good percentage, obviously. It's very difficult for members of Congress to really understand our issues when they don't have a healthcare background. It's obviously much easier for physician members of Congress to understand our issues. And we want to have as many physician members of Congress as possible to help us. But it's very difficult for physicians running for Congress, particularly the first time, to understand just how the politics work, asking people for money, going to your colleagues and saying, hey, can you not just write a check for 500, but I really need a check for over 2,000. That's hard to do. That's kind of not in the DNA of most physicians. And so making that leap is difficult. But if we could get more physicians running for office, whether that's at the state and local level or federal level, it's only going to help us. And so we obviously try to support as many of those physician candidates as we can who have, in our opinion, a good chance to win. And we did so with many of those candidates. Here's my information. I'm sorry that I could not do this live with you all. I am at my son's travel basketball AAU tournament this weekend, and so I wasn't sure what our schedule would be, and I didn't want to miss that. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to send me an email or send me a text. I'm not the best at answering my phone if I don't recognize a number, but I'm pretty good at email and text. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or want updates on whether it's the elections or whether it's legislative issues. But I do appreciate your practice's interest and engagement and support, in particular of RadPac. And we really need you guys because as much as we try to do our job to the best of our ability in DC, uh, we're further helped with the support that we get from you all. So thank you very much.